Oh, great.
When we look into the vast annals of history, we see a large plot hole that is as deep and bottomless as the fries at a Red Robin's. For many years, historians, treasure hunters, and so-called free thinkers have attempted to fill this hole with their own interpretations and, quote, undisputed historical facts and sources. But all of them, time and time again, have failed to ask the truly important questions about his story. Questions like, why did Mr. Krabs join the Axis powers? Or, who was the main character in World War I? And even, how did the fall of Constantinople affect LeBron's legacy? It's in these unorthodox questions where we begin to understand the geopolitical significance of places like Ohio and the Marshall Islands, or even the consequences of losing a rap battle and getting rejected from intergalactic art school. Because of these questions, we now know about the vast cultural implications of a right Twix bar and the world-shaping event that was the 1922 Comic-Con. When we treat history like it's interpreted my way or the highway, we will forever fail to understand why places like France no longer exist. So join me, fellow comrades, as we examine what actually happened in history. Speaking of raids, I'd like to talk to you about today's video sponsor, NordVPN. In the DocuDubbery universe, NordVPN has been absolutely critical to the survival of empires, as we will later see, but it also can be critical to your internet safety. With the ability to encrypt your internet traffic and hide your virtual location, NordVPN can guarantee that your IP will never be pulled by AI gamer Trump. With tons and tons of servers all over the world, NordVPN can also help you overcome censorship and content that is blocked in your country. All one has to do is change the server in which your traffic is routed, which NordVPN allows you to do easily. I personally like to route my traffic through the server NordVPN has set up in Vatican City, so I can feel much closer to His Holiness Pope Pinion IV. If securing your internet privacy is something important to you, go to nordvpn.com/docudubbery to get a 2-year plan plus 4 additional months with a huge discount. It's risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. Don't be like King Tut and get your tomb discovered because you cancelled your NordVPN subscription. Use the link in my description to protect yourself on the internet today. Now let's get back to the action. The single domino that started the chain of events that would lead to one of the most deadly centuries in the history of humanity came in one of the most unassuming forms imaginable: the simple board game of the simple board game of the simple board game of Monopoly. This game would be more consequential than when Caligula declared war on the ocean, or even when Napoleon told the Duke of Wellington to be there or be square. This simple roleplay game would be the biggest vehicle for revolution and financial ruin in the entirety of the 20th century. In 1848, after suffering one of the most embarrassing defeats in Monopoly at the hands of his annoying father-in-law, German philosopher Karl Marx would rewrite the rules of Monopoly in a game theory essay that attempted to prevent friends and family from bringing financial ruin upon each other.
Why would he do that?
He infamously criticized Monopoly for its lack of government and defined his political vision, writing, "Socialism is when the government does stuff, and if it does a lot of stuff, it's communism." Communism's name itself was derived from the community chess cards featured in the dice rolling game. And just like these cards could make or break one's Monopoly gaming experience, followers of Marx believed that his philosophy would either make or break society. Later, his new rulebook for Monopoly would be adapted for real life when it was published as the Communist Manifesto, a work of literature that would come to define the 20th century. Marx's work would pass by unnoticed for many decades, but Monopoly itself continued to be a revolving issue. In 1890, the United States began experiencing some trust issues. Huge monopolies like Standard Oil and the Vanderbilt Railroad were engaging in anti-competitive business practices that began bankrupting other companies through outrageously expensive hotels. To counter this, the United States Congress passed the P. Sherman Antitrust Act, which prohibited all monopolies, cartels, and trusts from 42 Wallaby Way all the way to 800 miles east of the city of Atlanta.
Okay, now why would you do that? That's... Why? Why? Oh my god.
Thought to be a noble act that would bring about the end of monopolies, this piece of legislation would have detrimental consequences.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, as history crossed into the 20th century, there was another monopoly in play. It was the monopoly on power in Europe, as many famous royal families like the Romanovs and the Habsburgs held
Wait, like Natasha Romanoff from Marvel? Sounds like it.
absolute control over their respective territories. It was in these times where many found it increasingly hard to advance themselves in society. Such was the case for a young Austrian non-fungible token painter who in 1908 applied twice to a prestigious art school but was both times rejected. Thinking
Skill issue. Imagine getting rejected from an art school twice. That's not gonna end up bad at all. Right?
he could be an intergalactic artist instead, this painter would also apply to the Yolkian School of Art, but was rejected by this academy as well. We'll come back to this character as he will play a pivotal role in the 20th century. But the days were numbered.
That sounds like a bad thing. Why do you say it like that? Okay. We're good.
For the European
No, we're good.
autocrats, as disasters in Bikini Bottom would begin to unravel the unquestioned rule of monarchs throughout the globe. And it would happen in the same manner that overthrew the Bourbon monarchy in the French Revolution.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that. It's kind of sad.
Famine. Over in the Marshall Islands, the Bikini Bottom monarch, King Neptune III, began to neglect his duties as head of state, and in 1910, a massive chum famine set in that would notoriously decimate the Bikini Bottom poor into mass starvation.
Jeez.
To make matters worse, King Neptune failed to address this situation properly, instead telling his citizens, let them eat barnacles, which is the human equivalent of telling them to eat fecal matter. This comment sparked a full-blown revolution to overthrow the monarchy in Bikini Bottom.
Yeah, I bet they
Having
did
been
like that.
radicalized by an old Karl Marx Monopoly gameplay pamphlet, Squidward Tentacles began organizing a communist revolution that started targeting members of the Bikini Bottom elite with violence via pie bombs. Fearing
Guys, violence is never the answer. Never.
for his life, the aristocratic Mr. Krabs contacted the German Empire, who had laid claim to the nearby Marshall Islands, so that they could help put down the communist revolt. Sensing an opportunity, Kaiser Wilhelm II sent several U-boats in 1911 that quickly restored order to Bikini Bottom and put down Squidward's revolt. Comrade Squidward would be taken back to Germany to be held as a political prisoner, but news of his revolution had already spread across the globe like wildfire. Emboldened by Squidward standing up to the autocratic monopoly that was King Neptune, the US would use the P. Sherman Antitrust Act to break up the US mega monopoly that was Standard Oil. This event would traumatize a young Mr. Monopoly who had always looked up to Standard Oil as a father figure. Further radical action would be taken against autocratic monopolies when in 1914 a terrorist pig organization known as the Black Hams assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the Habsburg Austro-Swan-Hungarian Empire. This action shocked many of the monarchs across Europe and led to the Austro-Swan-Hungarians declaring war on the Serbian pigs. This action would trigger a network of alliances that plunged the entirety of Europe and Earth into the First World War.
Wow. Why would they do that? Why?
World War I would divide Europe into two teams, which were the Central Powers made up of Germany, the Austro-Swan-Hungarian Empire, and the Chicago Bulls-loving Ottoman Empire, and the Entente, which included France, Britain, and Russia. Although not always angry, many of the birds across Europe were outraged about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and would join the Central Powers. This war to end all wars would see a whole new range of industrialized warfare brought to the battlefield. Planes, tanks, machine guns, Rickrolling, and Angry Birds all were used
What?
to devastate.
They used Rickrolling in World War I? Seriously? That's insane. Why would they do that?
Effect. Not all animals would side with the Central Powers, however. Many dogs decided that their interests were best represented with the Entente, and many began enlisting in the British Royal Flying Corps.
Yes,
One
sir.
young canine cadet, Snoopy, is
Snoopy!
often remembered as one of the great pilots in history.
Oh, Snoopy fought in World War I? That's insane. Wow. Wow.
As one of the most vicious battles of the war unfolded at the Somme, the Germans, disappointed with the catastrophic string of defeats they had encountered deploying the Angry Birds as infantry units, began slingshotting the birds across no man's land to devastating effect.
Oh,
Although none of
I
the
think
Angry
they
Birds
do
would
something.
survive being used as artillery ammo, their sacrifice began putting increased pressure on the Western Front. Over the skies of the Somme, many of history's first dogfights took place, where Snoopy and the Aerial K-9 Division would engage the Red Baron for the first time. During these first engagements, the Red Baron put many of the Entente dogs down, including fan favorite Lieutenant Marley, and even shot down Snoopy's heavily modified Sopwith Camel. The killing off of Ra-Ra Rasputin at the end of World War I Season 3 did little to appease Russian audiences, and the Germans were not connecting well with the series' main British character, Adrian Carton de Wiart. To improve the click-through rate, writers decided to completely scrap the Eastern Front by having the Germans send Squidward and Vladimir Lenin to Russia to help facilitate a communist revolution that would overthrow the provisional government and knock them out of the war completely. With soaring production costs in both human lives and financial expenditures, Europe decided to begin leaning more and more on the North American market, who became involved with the film project as early as 1916. The American viewers demanded more comedic gaffes in the war, and as a result the British began introducing Rick Rolling to the battlefield to further worsen the Germans' morale.
That's bad.
Was ist das? This is the British terms of surrender. Play it.
Germany was further outraged when their war hero and expert ace pilot was shot down and killed off camera by Snoopy as part of Operation Warpath in 1918. Though buried by the Allies with full military honours, many were in disbelief that the Red Baron's last words were, "I've been snooped," and not something about his love for the German fatherland. In November of 1918, Germany decided to quit the World War I series altogether, as they were angered by the American audience, quote, turning this serious project into a Marvel film, and complained about the excessive use of Rick Rolling by the British as war crimes, to which the British First Lord of the Admiralty famously replied, "Your mother's a war crime." This was the final straw, as German Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated over these comments just days later, and the Germans completely pulled out of the project, effectively ending World War I. At the Treaty of Versailles, the Entente decided to slap Germany with all of the production costs for the war, and even blame them for the series being a catastrophic failure for the well-being of Europe. This is not to be confused, however, with the Treaty of Versailles, Ohio, which ended the Great Holy War between Ohio and Michigan over the Toledo Strip nearly 100 years prior. These financial reparations on Germany would have catastrophic consequences, as the money and politics of Europe quickly began to shift. Unfortunately, the auspices of the Treaty of Versailles, as well as the unspeakable casualty rate of the Angry Birds, would cause the Austro-Swan-Hungarian Empire to dissolve, ending 400 years of Habsburg rule. Having been slapped with crippling war reparations and insurmountable bond debts, Germany had no choice but to restructure their debt by getting into cryptocurrencies and NFTs. Although meme stocks like the infamous Austro-Swan-Hungarian army coin would soar in popularity and strengthen the value of the German mark, when the German state put on the disastrous Feuer Festival, it would destroy consumer confidence in crypto bros and collapse the German economy into utter ruin. It was in these troubling financial times where new forms of political philosophies and governments began springing up all across Europe. Further fueled by the Great Twix Split of 1920, the left Twixes-backed Bolshevik, led by Lenin, Squidward, and Stalin, would eventually see
Not Squidward too?
seize power in Russia and establish a communist government. The Bolsheviks wanted to rapidly industrialize the lagging Russian manufacturing district,
Wow, just get
and
better
to do
Wi-Fi.
this, they needed to attract the best workers in all the world. To accomplish this, Comrade Squidward began a campaign of rewriting warehouse logistics manuals with heavy Marxist biases that began attracting expert foremen to Russia, including a young Bobbert the Builder.
Bob the Builder.
In addition, Stalin,
Bob the Builder?
Squidward, Trotsky, and Lenin formed a rock band called the Wheatles to help communism gain a global following. Although the band was short-lived, they recorded a number of smash hits, including Back in the USSR, Revolution, and Let It Weave.
Let it weave.
With complete consolidation of power in Eastern Europe, the Bolsheviks formed the Soviet Union at the 1922 Comecon, which would be an ever-present force in global politics for the remainder of the 20th century. But over in Italy, an entirely new form of political philosophy was in the works to counter the typically slow-moving, bureaucratic nature of communism. It was known as fascism, and it was entirely built on the premise that a country and its government must be totally focused on a need for speed. Although interdimensional historians credit Karl Hitler from the Cars universe with the creation of fascism, this political philosophy was able to emerge in our dimension after the two universes became linked. This happened in a catastrophic histoastronet-geological event when the timeline split due to India falling off the flat Earth, then traveling back in time through a wormhole and crashing back into the Earth. This would forever change our known reality and link our world to the Cars universe and many other universes when our space-time became intertwined. This linkage of the multiverse could be navigated through the infinite office space dimension that was the back rooms. Contact with Karl Hitler was first made by Italian plumbers Mario and Luigi, who thought they could use this new radical way of thinking to get the plumbing industry deregulated in Italy. In 1920, the Super Mario Brothers found a young, energetic Italian politician by the name of Benito Mussolini, who they thought would be a good puppet for their plumbing visions. In exchange for financial backing and connections, Mussolini agreed to carry out the fastest wishes of Mario and Luigi in a political alliance many historians now recognize as the Third Triumvirate. Mussolini successfully seized control of the Italian government during the 1922 Shy Guy March on Rome. These new rising political powers seemed to go relatively unnoticed to the existing established global powers. France was too busy squabbling with the ocean, and Britain was fixated with its recent discovery of the lost tomb of King Tut. The British Empire managed to pin down his location after his mummified brain connected to shady motel Wi-Fi in 1922, as his NordVPN subscription had been cancelled nearly 2 millennia ago as part of a cost-cutting initiative by Queen Cleopatra. It was in this period of neglect by the global powers where a catastrophic, highly orchestrated event would occur that would seal the fate of the world for the remainder of the century. Not forgetting what the US government had done to Standard Oil in 1911, a young Mr. Monopoly had been biding his time in the shadows as he sought revenge. As the world became distracted by the release of the World War I series, Mr. Monopoly had begun to buy up large shares of various companies anonymously through a shell company located in Bikini Bottom. He did this with the intent of running a pump and dump scheme of the entire US economy. In the roaring 1920s, Mr. Monopoly began a very public campaign of getting everyone out to invest in the stock market. Many people began investing their entire life savings, causing stock prices to soar and become substantially overvalued. On October 29th, 1929, Mr. Monopoly randomly dumped over 16 million shares in a single day, causing a massive plummet in stock prices and a financial panic that collapsed the entire US economy. Thousands of banks went out of business as a result of a cash frenzy and were unable to make the standard $200 payments for all citizens who had passed go. This American financial disaster was not just bound to the United States, however. Countries all over the world had felt its effects. This crisis would occupy the US for several years, as President Franklin Roosevelt would have to do several sessions of intense therapy to cure America's depression. The global countries devastated by this scheme would include Germany, who without the support of America's now bankrupted crypto bros, found themselves in a dire financial situation. The Germans wanted a quick fix to their collapsing crypto-based economy, which opened the door for a little-known Austrian NFT painter named Hitler to step onto the scene. Hitler came into power in 1933, insisting that he, and he alone, could solve all of Germany's issues very quickly. This was because Hitler was an ardent practicer of fascism and believed Germany had an overwhelming need for speed, although many historians will argue he may have slightly misunderstood what that meant. Hitler garnered many resentments that fueled his rise to power, which included being rejected from art school 3 times, Germany being unjustly forced to cover the costs of the World War I flop, a tough breakup with Shrek, and he was angered by the alien race of the Yolkians, who had recently kidnapped his dog. Wanting Germany to be able to quickly overtake its enemies, both intergalactic and interdimensional, Hitler began pouring money into nationalizing German science divisions to create new weapons. This investment brought infamous names to the forefront of the fascist movement, which included Dr. Nefario, Dr. Heisenberg, Jimmy Neutron, and Dr. Doofenshmirtz. Together, these scientists began working on anti-gravity research, rockets, jets, and sometimes crystal meth. By 1935, fascism was booming in Central Europe following the release of Karl Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, which began circulating amongst the high command of the Third Reich and Italian plumbing circles. In this book, Karl Hitler discussed expanding the influence of the racially supreme German and Italian racing cars by creating long roads through conquered territories that he called Lebensstrasse, or living streets. This struck a chord with the Italians, who as descendants of the once mighty Roman Empire, believed it was their duty to build roads everywhere. In response, they started to invade a number of countries, which included Ethiopia, Albania, and Yoshi Island. The Mario Brothers would later go on to win big contracts installing super mushroom pipeline systems in all these acquired territories. At the 1936 Olympics, Hitler was ready to show the world the true greatness of fascism. However, his sprinters were absolutely embarrassed by American sprinter Jesse Owens, who proved he was the fastest human being on the planet. This made Hitler begin to reject fascism altogether, as he watched all his beliefs shatter right before his eyes. Disillusioned with the fascist movements following the conclusion of the Olympics, Dr. Nefario would quit the Third Reich, as he realized Hitler had very little interest in stealing the moon. He instead would freeze himself in carbonate and mail himself to Florida. With the fastest movement in a total directional crisis, Dr. Heisenberg realized he needed to cook in order to get Karl Hitler in direct contact with Hitler. Heisenberg developed a crystal meth pill called Pevitin, which allowed one to no-clip into the backrooms that connected our universe to the Cars universe. From there, the Third Reich established direct relations with the Axel powers, and Karl Hitler managed to reconvince Hitler about the merits of fascism. In 1938, intent on building the Lebensstrasse, Hitler annexed the Germanic nation of Drusselstein, as well as Austria, with plans of uniting the Germanic peoples. The early success of the fascist ideology began attracting some of the quickest beings on Earth to an increasingly hostile Germany just months before the outbreak of the Second World War. One of these beings was Sonic the Hedgehog, who proposed that the German military could speed-run invasions of European countries like France that would make Caesar, the British, and World War I Germany extremely jealous. The Wehrmacht began adopting these speed-run tactics, and in 1939 they started preparing themselves for a speed-run invasion of Europe record that would stand for thousands of years to come. They called this tactic Blitzkrieg, and it was used to devastating effect for the first half of the Second World War. Germany began their official speed-run invasion of Europe attempt in September of 1939 when they invaded Poland. Although met with a large cavalry charge from the Reihum on the opening day of World War II, the Third Reich had little trouble sweeping quickly through the country. They then turned their sights on other famous European states, including the Netherlands, Denmark, and Lego City, capturing
Lego
them in
City.
record time. At the 15-minute Battle of Legoland, the Germans committed such egregious atrocities that Sonic the Hedgehog would defect from the Wehrmacht in protest and join the Allies. Lego City was unable to build military equipment quick enough to repel the German forces, and in May of 1940, the Third Reich marched into the streets of Lego City and immediately ordered all master builders to assist in the construction of the Wunderwaffe using illegal Lego building techniques. After the fall of Lego City, Germany turned its attention to conquering France and the Smurfs. They did this by forming a loose alliance with the Ocean, who had been fighting France for nearly 1900 years. Prior to the invasion, Blitzkrieg von Koenig advised the Third Reich to follow in his tracks by launching the attack through the Ardennes forest and trapping the Allies against the sea at Dunkirk. This worked to perfection. However, the turncoat Sonic was able to save the trapped Allied army at Dunkirk by speedrunning over 300,000 troops across the channel in a mere 10 minutes. After the miracle at Dunkirk, the Third Reich would go on to defeat the rest of France and even claim the highly coveted yellow jersey in the 1940 Tour de France, though this would later be revoked due to Peverton doping. A breakdown in relations between the Ocean and the Third Reich regarding the carving up of the conquered France would force the Ocean to utterly refuse to cooperate with the Germans for an invasion of Britain by sea, forcing the Third Reich to wage the Battle of Britain in the air. This turned out to be a total disaster for the Germans. To add further insult to injury, the Ocean would later leak the location of Germany's prize battleship, the Bismarck, to Larry the Lobster, who sank the vessel by strapping himself to a torpedo and hurling it at the hull. This victory heavily boosted the morale of the British and even helped coin the phrase, "keep calm and live like Larry." Unable to take Britain, the fascists turned their attention to the Soviet Union. This invasion had been heavily sought after by Field Marshal Bert, who envisioned a mighty street that stretched from Berlin to Moscow and beyond. Bert was a fastest fanatic who heavily leaned into Mein Kampf as inspiration for an invasion of the slower moving communists. Learning from the past mistakes of Napoleon, from his failed invasion of Russia and his flaws laid out in Wellington's diss track, Bert began planning a new invasion of the Soviet Union that would be a guaranteed success. While workshopping his invasion plans with Italian fascists Mario and Luigi, it is rumored that Mario was so enthusiastic about Commander Bert's plan, he is quoted as saying, "Let's invade the commies, Sesame," which gave Bert the idea to call this invasion street Sesame Street. Operation Bob Arasa began in 1941, where it was spearheaded by the notorious Minion Geld Brigade of the German 6th Army under the command of Field Marshal Hank Hill. Thomas the Tank Engine would also aid in the invasion by hauling the massive Gustav railway gun to the Eastern Front to be used for artillery barrages. Using tactics left over from Sonic, the Minions in the second invasion of Russia quickly seized strategic strongpoints in the Western Soviet territories that primarily consisted of small clusters of happy little trees. When the German 6th Army reached Stalingrad in the summer of 1942, desperate street fighting broke out between the Germans and the Soviet defenders. The Minions suffered horrific casualties and were easily picked off by Soviet sharpshooters like Vasily Zaitsev and Robert Grushev due to the lack of urban camouflage. As the Russian winter approached, the momentum of the German army began to fail, and the Soviets began amassing troops on the Volga River for a counter-offensive. Hours before the Red Army launched their infamous encirclement of Stalingrad, Field Marshal Hank Hill transmitted the following radio broadcast to the German High Command in an attempt to avert catastrophe.
"This is Hank Hill to command. I think General Zhukov is about to encircle our entire army. Please send reinforcements and some propane."
Unfortunately, Marshal Hill's transmission fell on deaf ears, and when the 6th Army was encircled the next day, the tide of World War II began to turn. Over in the Pacific, the war was beginning to shift as well. The US had joined the war in 1941 after the Japanese had done the modern-day equivalent of a massive drone strike on America's naval base in Hawaii. This began a naval slugfest all over the Pacific Ocean between the Japanese Empire and the American giant. In the conflict, the Japanese had an ace up their sleeve in the form of Mr. Krabs,
Mr.
who in
Krabs.
1943 began using sonar beams off the back of the Krusty Krab to detect Allied naval positions. He then would transmit these positions to the Japanese, who in exchange for Mr. Krabs' loyalty granted him several Krusty Krab franchises across their growing empire. But this strategy is not as effective as many historians think, because in 1942, Japan had failed to renew its NordVPN subscription, which made their data and transmissions vulnerable to interception by the Americans. And the Americans were using this to their advantage, thwarting attempts by the Japanese to link up the Australian-based Emu Empire and successfully defeating the Japanese surprise attack on Midway. But the main weapon against the Japanese was not information or aircraft carriers, but a revolutionary adhesive known as Flex Tape.
Flex Tape.
Developed by Petty Officer Phil Swift, Flex Tape would prolong the life of many of the Allies' destroyers and aircraft carriers, as they could now take almost twice the amount of damage as a regular ship and still function. A prime example of this water-resistant adhesive technology would be the USS Yorktown, which was repaired in just 48 hours when it received what can only be described as a lot of damage that should have put it out of commission for several weeks. Flex Tape would ensure Allied naval superiority in the Pacific Ocean and allowed them to launch their famous campaign of island hopping, which inched them closer and closer to the Japanese mainland. As the Allies drew closer to Japan, the fighting became increasingly brutal, climaxing at the Battle of Wuhu Island. Wuhu Island was located around 300 miles east of Japan and was defended by over 10,000 Mies loyal to the Japanese Emperor. The army fought bravely under the command of Matt, but were ultimately defeated by General MacArthur when he used Patrick Star to outflank the army at Red Iron Bridge. This battle would be one of the deadliest by casualty rate in all of the Second World War, as the Mies did not believe in surrender. Out of the 10,000 Mies that fought in the battle, only 300 would survive. This was mainly due to a bonsai charge, which they did at the very beginning of the battle. This victory for the Allies dealt one of the biggest and final blows to the Japanese Empire. By 1943, the situation looked grim for the Axis powers in Europe. Hitler had amassed too many enemies as he found himself at war even with the Yorkians after he had fired a V-2 rocket into space and killed their king as revenge for rejecting him from their art school. To the south, Wario and Waluigi had made the difficult choice to attack their own beloved Italia in order to save it, assisting in the invasion of Sicily at Cheap Cheap Beach. To the east, the Germans were being pushed out of the USSR thanks to the efficient industrial production of tanks led by Bob the Builder. The minions began surrendering to the rapidly advancing Red Army en masse, deeply hurting the might of the Eastern German Army. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels had attempted to play the entirety
It's
of
a really
Operation
stupid
Barbarossa off as a
YouTube
happy
video
little accident,
about
but many
history,
Germans
but with
weren't
like
buying it.
fictional
In
characters.
1944, matters
It's really
became worse when
dumb.
the Allies launched
No.
the D-Day invasion, opening
I
up
don't
yet
know,
another
I don't know. It's funny though. You should watch it. It's so dumb.
front on the Germans. This would see the death of some of Germany's best troops, including Dr. Doofenshmirtz's father, who was killed weeks after the invasion by an accomplished British RAF pilot. Even Hitler's technology and scientists began to fail him at this stage of the war. His anti-gravity machine Die Glocke, that was developed by Jimmy Neutron, was tragically destroyed in 1944 when Jimmy Neutron's dad ordered an aggressive pizza. On the Eastern Front, the Gustav railway gun was destroyed after the Soviets played an Uno reverse card on the Minion operators. With the writing on the wall that defeat was certain for the Third Reich, many of its leaders began to flee. In Italy, the collapse of the Third Triumvirate forced the Mario Brothers to escape to Argentina using their vast underground piping network, and many other fascists would do the same thing by using the back rooms. Although on the roads, Hitler was not yet defeated, and he began exploring options to save his doomed situation. At first he tried to link up with Karl Hitler via the portal in his underground bunker that led to the back rooms. This however failed, which gave Hitler only two options. He could either no-clip into the back rooms and escape to Argentina and risk being murked by a Giga Chad, or he could challenge the Allies to a winner-takes-all rap battle and secure victory from the jaws of defeat. With the Soviets now on the doorstep to Berlin and the rest of the Allies closing in from the west, Hitler and his entourage began preparing sick beats with propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Hitler sent out the challenge in late April 1945, and in response the Allies dispatched Private Eminem of the 8th Mile Infantry Unit, known for his potent freestyle rapping abilities. Eminem arrived in the besieged city of Berlin on April 30th, 1945, where he met Hitler at the ruins of the Olympic Stadium in front of a small crowd. In the eyes of history, this would be the most decisive rap battle since Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams in the infamous presidential rap battle of 1800. Hitler began the rap battle by shouting out his homies on the Eastern Front, and then hit Eminem with the following lyrics.
Every frown trying to get in my pants. I'll conquer you like I conquered France. You try to guard me, but you'll get Dunkirked on. I'll make you flee like you're gonna do at Saigon. But Eminem swung back at Hitler and responded with, you claim you bowl hard, but you only got one ball. Your handles are so weak, you couldn't even keep goal. You think yourself a Caesar, but I ain't seen no crown. Your bars be leaving me as dissatisfied as Ava Brown. Hitler fumbled in his response, unprepared for how personal the attacks would get. Eminem quickly pressed his advantage by finishing Hitler with the following. You tried to go to art school, but your paintings were straight bad. After 4 years of being schooled by Russia, I'd say you're a stolen grad.
In the end, the lyrics would prove to be too much for Hitler, and he lost all hope at victory. Later that day, he would decide to end it all, along with many of his ghost riders. This rap battle would secure the end of World War II, as Germany surrendered to the Allies days later, and Japan would follow suit later that year. The defeat of fascism promised peace, security, and justice throughout the galaxy, but shakeups in the New World Order would only begin to fracture the fragile alliance between the Soviet Union and the West. These said shakeups would come to the Allied leadership when Winston Churchill was defeated by Attlee in the 1945 UK elections, thanks to his coalition of Moms Against Vaping. In the US, FDR had passed away in the closing days of the war and was replaced by his tough-on-communism vice president, Harry Truman. Joseph Stalin, however, would continue to lead the Soviet Union, as he had an overwhelming approval rating of 147%. The post-war era saw many lands begin to fall under the sphere of influence of either the communist Soviet Union or the capitalist Western allies that included Britain, France, and the United States. These included places like Germany and Lego City that were carved up into zones of influence between the four major victorious powers of the Second World War. Although initially united in their victory over the Third Reich, these four victorious powers would break in their unity after a falling out over politics. The Great Twix Split of 1920 into left and right Twix had produced two extremely different philosophies regarding the creation of the beloved candy bar. In time, both of these philosophies would find their footing with each of the emerging post-World War II superpowers that were the United States and the USSR. The deep divisions between left and right Twix would only serve to expedite the collapsing relations between the commies and the cappies into a hostile and dangerous period known as the Cold War. To US President Truman, a right Twix was more than just a candy bar. It represented the deep roots of the American dream, with caramel cascaded over cookie like the Californian mountain ranges, and cloaked in chocolate like the cloak George Washington wore when he crossed the Delaware River. To Stalin, left Twix represented the prosperity that communism had brought to the Soviets, with the flowing caramel over cookie demonstrating the overabundance of food that collectivization had produced, and the cookie bathed in chocolate like the Soviets had bathed in the blood of their German invaders. Stalin was further emerged in left Twixism due to the large financial backing left Twix had provided the Bolsheviks in the early stages of the Russian Revolution. Immediately following the death of Hitler, many of the minions who had either been captured or defeated by the Soviet Union now recognized Joseph Stalin as the most despicable human on earth, and many began swearing their allegiances to him. This flattered the Man of Steel, and after pardoning the minions of their war crimes, he began claiming much of the free real estate that was Eastern Europe into his zone of influence. Stalin expected the minions to be a powerful ally in the coming fight against the West, but instead he found that years of imperialist and fascist mindsets had made adopting communism extremely hard for the very individualistic minions. To fix this, Stalin ordered the minions to be sent to the gulags, which were political labor camps designed by Stalin's right-hand subordinate and hero of Stalingrad, Nikita Robert Khrushchev. Stalin then looked to export communism as well as left Twixism to the very heart of Western capitalist Europe when he began to covertly back the communist revolutionary Papa Smurf in the 1946 Blue Revolution that overthrew the pro-Western Smurfian monarchy. This move deeply alarmed the US and would kick off a series of moves and countermoves between the US and the USSR for the rest of the century. In response to Stalin's aggressive actions in Smurfville, Truman began flooding Western Europe with cheap and abundant right Twix bars, which would make it very difficult for Stalin to spread left Twixism. He also started a TV program called The Truman Show that sought to teach Americans about the dangers of left Twixism. Things came to a head in Berlin, where right Twix bars from the American, French, and British sectors began outcompeting left Twix bars in the Soviet sector. Stalin felt tremendously threatened by right Twix's head-to-head dominance in the market and began cutting off the supplies from Western Germany to Berlin, trying to force right Twix completely out of the city. However, the Western powers countered the aggressive action with the Berlin airlift, which dropped thousands of pounds of right Twix bars into the isolated city every day. Eventually, Stalin relented and removed the embargo of Berlin, but he appointed Bob the Builder to be the head of the East German state-run construction company in the hopes that he could improve the outlook on communist governments. Bob the Builder began a campaign called Can We Fix It, which sought to fill the holes with cement in the city so that no one would curse the government. Meanwhile, in the US, Senator McCarthy and FBI Director Hoover became increasingly concerned that communist infiltrators in the American federal bureaucracy would bring down their capitalist system, or even worse, dismantle their fried chicken industry. This was absolutely true, as Stalin had successfully infiltrated many American fried chicken startups by 1948 and was in the early stages of developing his highly coveted Molotov cocktail. To combat these fears, President Truman signed Executive Order 9835, which required federal employees to be screened for loyalty to the American government.